Welcome to another haunting hour here at 3 a.m. Stories, where darkness whispers and nightmares come alive. In the depths of these twilight hours, when the world grows quiet and shadows dance at the corners of your vision, we bring you tales that will chill your bones and haunt your dreams. To our loyal listeners who brave these dark tales with us each night, welcome back to the shadows. And to those who've just stumbled upon our little corner of the night, we've been waiting for you. Hit that subscribe button to join our midnight gathering and ensure you never miss the horrors that lurk in the dark. Every like and share helps our sinister stories reach those who, like you, dare to explore the unknown. Your support fuels the darkness that feeds these tales, pushing us to dig deeper into the abyss for stories that will keep you awake until dawn. Now, dim your lights, check your locks, and settle in close. Tonight's tales are particularly unsettling. And remember, some stories are best told in the dark. Let the nightmares begin. The Body in the Forest. A Tale of Torment. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. It was a quiet afternoon when I decided to take a walk through the woods, a path less traveled, away from the usual hiking trails. The solitude was what I sought, a break from the chaos of everyday life. But what I found in those woods changed me forever. I had wandered off the beaten track, letting my curiosity guide me through the thick undergrowth. The further I went, the quieter the world seemed to become. The chirping birds and rustling leaves faded into an eerie silence, broken only by the crunch of my footsteps on the forest floor. That was when I first noticed it. An overpowering sweet smell, almost sickly. It was out of place amidst the earthy scents of the forest. My curiosity piqued. I followed the scent, pushing aside branches and leaves until I stumbled upon the source. My heart skipped a beat as I pulled back the last bit of undergrowth. There, lying in a shallow depression in the ground, was a body. The man had been dead for a while. His skin was bloated, discolored in shades of green and black, with parts of him oozing fluid. The sight was grotesque, and yet I couldn't look away. Flies buzzed around him, and I noticed that small animals had been feasting on his remains. My hands trembled as I pulled out my phone and called the police. They instructed me to stay with the body until they arrived. I remember staring at the lifeless form, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Who was he? How had he ended up here, in the middle of nowhere? As I waited, the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the forest floor. Time seemed to stretch on endlessly. The oppressive smell, the eerie silence, and the encroaching darkness all combined to create a nightmarish atmosphere. My mind played tricks on me. Every rustle of leaves sounded like footsteps. Every shadow seemed to move. The forest, once a place of solace, had transformed into something menacing. As night fell, the police finally arrived, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. I led them to the body, relieved to no longer be alone with it. They took my statement and asked me to wait while they examined the scene. One officer stayed with me, his presence a comfort amidst the surreal horror of the situation. Suicide, the coroner later confirmed. The man had taken his own life, far from civilization, where he thought he wouldn't be found. But I had found him, and in doing so, I had disturbed his final resting place. For days afterward, I couldn't shake the image from my mind. His lifeless eyes, the twisted expression on his face, it haunted me. At night, I dreamt of him. In my dreams, he would speak to me, his voice a low, guttural whisper. "Why did you find me?" he would ask, his tone accusatory. "I was at peace. You should have left me alone." At first, I dismissed the dreams as my mind's way of processing the trauma. But they became more frequent, more vivid. In one dream, I was back in the woods, standing over his body. He sat up, his decayed face inches from mine. "You took away my peace," he whispered. "Now you must pay the price." I woke up in a cold sweat, my heart racing. The dreams continued, growing darker each night. He told me that he was angry, that he wanted me to suffer as he had. He urged me to end my own life, to join him in eternal rest. The line between dream and reality began to blur. I started seeing him during the day, a fleeting shadow in the corner of my vision, a reflection in a window. Desperate for answers, I returned to the woods. I retraced my steps to the spot where I had found him. The police tape had long since been removed, and nature had reclaimed the area. But as I stood there, the air grew heavy, and that same sickly sweet smell wafted through the air. "Why did you come back?" The voice echoed through the trees, sending a chill down my spine. I spun around, but there was no one there. Yet, I felt his presence, oppressive and malevolent. Days turned into weeks, and the dreams persisted. I found myself withdrawing from friends and family, consumed by the haunting visions. The man's face was etched into my mind, his words a constant whisper in my ears. I researched the history of the area, hoping to find some explanation, some way to put his spirit to rest. What I discovered chilled me to the bone. He wasn't the first to take his life in those woods. Over the years, several people had gone there to end their lives, seeking solitude in their final moments. The locals whispered about a curse, a malevolent force that drew the lost and despairing to their deaths. They spoke of a spirit, angry and vengeful, who lingered in the forest, luring others to join him. I became obsessed with the idea of breaking the curse, of freeing myself from his grip. I consulted with spiritualists, priests, and anyone who claimed to have knowledge of the supernatural. Some advised rituals, others suggested prayers. I tried everything, but nothing seemed to work. One night, the dreams took a darker turn. I was back in the woods, standing before the man's grave. He rose from the ground, his decayed form more terrifying than ever. "You can't escape me," he said. "You belong to me now." I woke up screaming, my heart pounding in my chest. The whispers didn't stop when I awoke. They followed me throughout the day, a constant, sinister presence. I started to lose touch with reality. I saw him everywhere, in reflections, in shadows, in crowds. His voice became a relentless drone in my mind. "End it," he urged. "Join me." I stood at the edge of a cliff, the wind howling around me. His voice was louder than ever, urging me to take that final step. I teetered on the edge, the weight of his presence pressing down on me. But something held me back, a flicker of will, a stubborn refusal to give in. I took a step back, defying his command. The wind seemed to carry his frustrated scream as I walked away from the cliff's edge. Determined to reclaim my life, I sought help. Therapy, medication, and a support system of friends and family became my lifeline. Slowly, the dreams lessened, and his voice faded into a distant echo. But every now and then, in the dead of night, I still see him in my dreams. His eyes bore into mine, filled with rage and sorrow. "You will never be free," he whispers. And deep down, I know he's right. Some part of him will always linger, a shadow in the corners of my mind, but I refuse to let him control me. The woods remain a forbidden place for me. I avoid them, knowing that his presence still lingers there. Others may wander off the beaten path, drawn by curiosity or a desire for solitude. I can only hope they never encounter what I did, for the forest holds secrets, dark and twisted, and some things are best left undisturbed. The Victorian house's secret: doorways into endless dark place. Sarah and Marcus had always dreamed of escaping their suffocating lives in the city. Their tech startup jobs had become a grinding routine, and the concrete jungle felt like it was slowly crushing their spirits. When they stumbled upon a listing for an old Victorian house in a quiet New England town, it seemed too good to be true. The price was well below market value, and the photos showed a charming property with character, exactly what they'd been searching for. "It needs some work," the realtor had said nervously, shuffling through papers. "The previous owners left rather abruptly. Family emergency, I believe." She wouldn't meet their eyes as she spoke, but Sarah and Marcus were too excited about the prospect of their dream home to notice her unease. The house stood at the end of a winding road, partially hidden behind ancient oak trees whose branches seemed to reach for the sky like gnarled fingers. Its faded blue paint and wraparound porch gave it a timeless quality, as though it existed slightly out of step with the modern world. The neighboring houses were far enough away to provide privacy, but close enough to prevent total isolation. Mrs. Chen, their elderly neighbor, brought over a casserole the day they moved in. As she stood in their kitchen, her eyes darted nervously around the room. "The last 3 families," she began, then stopped herself. "Well, never mind that. Just be careful. Houses this old, they develop quirks." The first month passed uneventfully. They settled into a routine, working remotely from their respective home offices. Sarah took up gardening, while Marcus started refinishing the hardwood floors. The house had its creaks and groans, but they attributed these to its age. They were happy, truly happy, for the first time in years. Then came the morning Sarah found the door. She was in the basement doing laundry when she noticed it. A door made of dark weathered wood with brass fittings that looked centuries old. It stood in a corner that she could have sworn had been empty the day before. The door was oddly proportioned, too tall and narrow to be practical, and its surface was covered in intricate carvings that seemed to shift when viewed from different angles. "Marcus!" she called upstairs. "Did you install a door in the basement?" His footsteps creaked overhead, then down the stairs. "What door?" he asked, then stopped short when he saw it. That wasn't there yesterday." They approached it cautiously. The air around the door felt different, heavier somehow, as though the very atmosphere was being pulled toward it. Sarah reached out to touch the handle, but Marcus grabbed her wrist. "Wait," he said. "Something's not right. Doors don't just appear." They spent the rest of the day discussing what to do. Marcus wanted to call a contractor, but Sarah was oddly drawn to the door. That night, she dreamed of it opening, revealing a long corridor filled with whispers and shifting shadows. The next morning, the door was gone. In its place was smooth concrete wall, as though the door had never existed. They might have convinced themselves they'd imagined it, except for the single brass doorknob they found lying on the basement floor. Over the next few weeks, the door began appearing in different places throughout the house. They'd find it in closets, behind bookcases, sometimes even in impossible locations like the middle of walls or ceiling. Each time, it looked slightly different, sometimes older, sometimes newer, but always with those strange, shifting carvings. They started researching the house's history. The local library's records were spotty, but they discovered a pattern. Every few years, homeowners would suddenly leave, often abandoning their possessions. The house would sit empty for months before being sold at a drastically reduced price. One evening, while Marcus was away on a rare business trip, Sarah heard singing coming from behind the living room wall. It was a soft, melodic tune that seemed to call to her. When she investigated, she found the door had appeared again, this time with a warm light seeping through its edges. The rational part of her mind screamed to leave it alone, but curiosity and an inexplicable longing won out. She turned the handle. The door opened to reveal a vast library that couldn't possibly fit within the house's dimensions. Endless rows of bookshelves stretched into the distance, their tops lost in shadow. The air smelled of old paper and something else, something sweet and inviting. Sarah stepped through. The library was silent except for the soft whisper of pages turning themselves in unseen books. As she walked deeper into the stacks, she noticed the books were arranged not by author or subject, but by reader. She found a section labeled with her name, containing volumes chronicling every moment of her life, including moments yet to come. She opened one of the future volumes and began to read. The words described horrors she couldn't comprehend, events that would unfold if she continued down this path. Terrified, she slammed the book shut and turned to leave, only to find the door had vanished. Panic set in as she ran through the endless aisles, searching for an exit. The whispers grew louder, and the shadows between the shelves began to move with purpose. She caught glimpses of things lurking in the darkness, things with too many limbs and eyes that glowed like dying stars. Just when she thought all hope was lost, she spotted a familiar brass doorknob gleaming in the distance. She ran toward it, the shadows closing in behind her. As she yanked the door open, she heard a voice whisper her name, but she didn't look back. She tumbled through the door and found herself in her bedroom. The door slammed shut behind her and vanished into the wall. She was safe, but changed. The knowledge of what she'd seen, and what she'd read, would haunt her forever. When Marcus returned the next day, he found Sarah different, distant. She couldn't explain what had happened, couldn't find the words to describe the library or its impossible books. But that night, as they lay in bed, they heard it. The sound of a door creaking open somewhere in the house, followed by footsteps that moved across impossible angles. The door began appearing more frequently, and each time it opened to a different impossible space. Marcus found a room filled with mirrors that reflected versions of himself that weren't quite right. versions that moved independently and whispered dark secrets. Sarah discovered a garden where the flowers screamed when picked and the trees bled real blood. They tried to ignore it, to live their lives normally, but the door was persistent. It would appear in their dreams, in reflections, in the corner of their eyes. The house itself seemed to be changing, adapting to accommodate its impossible guest. Rooms would rearrange themselves overnight, stairs would lead to different destinations, and windows would look out onto landscapes that couldn't exist. One morning, they woke to find their bedroom had no exits, just smooth walls where doors and windows should be. As panic set in, the familiar dark door appeared, offering the only escape. They knew then that the house had made its choice for them. "We have to leave," Marcus said, packing their essentials with trembling hands. "We can't stay here anymore." But leaving proved difficult. Every time they tried to exit the house, they'd find themselves walking through the wrong door, ending up in those impossible spaces. The house didn't want to let them go. It was Mrs. Chen who finally helped them escape. She'd seen it happen before, she explained, as she performed an ancient ritual passed down through her family. The ceremony involved salt, burning herbs, and words in a language that hurt their ears to hear. They fled that night, leaving most of their possessions behind. As they drove away, Sarah looked back one last time. In every window of the house, she saw the dark door, watching them leave. They sold the house for a fraction of what they'd paid, desperate to be rid of it. The new owners were a young family with twin boys. Sarah wanted to warn them, but Marcus convinced her it would be pointless. Who would believe such an impossible story? Years have passed, but the dreams haven't stopped. In them, Sarah still walks through that door, still wanders those impossible spaces. Sometimes she sees the new owners there too, lost in their own versions of the house's twisted reality. And sometimes, in the darkest hours of the night, she hears a familiar creak, the sound of an old door opening somewhere it shouldn't be. They've moved across the country, changed their names, tried to forget. But Sarah knows the truth. You can't escape something that exists beyond the boundaries of reality. The door is patient. It wanders, it waits, and eventually, it finds you. Last week, Sarah found a brass doorknob in their new house, sitting innocently on the kitchen counter. Marcus wanted to throw it away, but she kept it. Better to know when the door is coming, she reasons, than to be caught unprepared. After all, some doors, once opened, can never truly be closed. And somewhere, in a house at the end of a winding road, behind ancient oak trees that reach for the sky like gnarled fingers, a dark door waits. It watches new families come and go, collecting their stories, their fears, their souls. It knows that time is meaningless, that reality is fluid, and that everyone, eventually, must walk through their own impossible door. Just remember, if you find a door where there shouldn't be one, a door with strange carvings that seem to move when you're not looking directly at them, leave it alone. Some thresholds are not meant to be crossed, some knowledge is not meant to be gained, and some doors are better left unopened. But if you do open it, if curiosity or fate or the house itself compels you, know that you're not alone in those impossible spaces. We're all there, wandering the endless library, fleeing from shadows with too many eyes, trying to find our way back to a reality that makes sense. And sometimes, in the deepest part of night, if you listen carefully, you might hear us whispering warnings from behind the walls, trying to save you from our fate. But by then, it's usually too late. The door has already chosen you. The Dark Forum, where lost ones leave digital traces. I still remember the last time I saw my sister Emma. It was a perfectly ordinary Tuesday morning in October, and she was heading out to meet her friends at the local coffee shop. She was wearing her favorite oversized burgundy sweater, her dark hair pulled back in a messy bun, and that silver locket Mom had given her for her 21st birthday. "Don't wait up," she'd said, grabbing her keys from the bowl by the door. "Tracy wants to show me some wedding venues after coffee." That was 3 years ago. She never made it to the coffee shop. The police investigation went nowhere. Her car was found in the parking lot, locked, with her phone still inside. The security cameras showed her pulling in, but mysteriously cut out for 8 minutes. When they came back online, her car was there, but Emma was gone. No signs of struggle, no evidence of foul play. Just nothing. I watched my parents crumble under the weight of her absence. Dad threw himself into work, taking every overtime shift he could get, as if keeping busy would somehow fill the void she left behind. Mom started attending every missing person support group within a 100-mile radius, desperately searching for answers in other people's tragedies. Me? I became obsessed with finding her. I created spreadsheets tracking every possible lead, plastered the city with missing person posters, and spent countless nights scrolling through true crime forums. I couldn't accept that she had simply vanished into thin air. That's how I found myself, at 3 a.m. on a particularly sleepless night, diving into the darkest corners of the internet. I'd exhausted all the usual missing persons forums and was following increasingly obscure links when I stumbled upon something different. The site was called Whisperweb, a minimalist forum with a black background and gray text that seemed to pulse slightly as you read it. The description claimed it was a place for those who walk between worlds to find their way home. I was about to click away. It seemed like just another paranormal roleplay site, when a thread title caught my eye: The In-Between, a guide for the lost and those who seek them. The original post was from a user called Voidwalker. We all know someone who's disappeared, someone who stepped out of reality and never stepped back in. But what if I told you they're not gone? What if I told you they exist in a space parallel to ours, a world of echoes and shadows where the lost wander endlessly? I know because I've been there. I am there, and I can help you find them. My hands were shaking as I created an account. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that this was just another dead end. But something about Voidwalker's words resonated with me. They described the world of the lost in vivid detail. A place where the sky was perpetually twilight, where buildings stood like hollow shells of their counterparts in our world, where shadows moved with purpose and whispered in voices just beyond understanding. I posted my story, expecting nothing. Within minutes, I received a private message. Your sister, the one in the burgundy sweater and silver locket, I've seen her. My heart stopped. I had never mentioned what Emma was wearing the day she disappeared. Not in my post, not anywhere on the forum. Who are you? I typed with trembling fingers. How do you know about the sweater? Because I'm here with her, in the in-between. She doesn't know she's lost yet. None of us do at first. But I see her walking past my window every day, looking confused, checking her phone that never works, trying to find her way to a coffee shop that doesn't exist here. I stared at the message for what felt like hours. It had to be a cruel joke. But why? What would anyone gain from this? Prove it, I wrote back. Tell me something only Emma would know. The response came quickly. Ask me about the scar on your left palm. The one you got when you were 12, trying to climb through her bedroom window after sneaking out to that concert she told you not to go to. She never told your parents it was her who stitched you up with her sewing kit because she didn't want you to get in trouble. My blood ran cold. No one knew about that night. It was our secret, a pact made in whispered promises and antiseptic. Over the next few weeks, I spent every free moment talking to Voidwalker. They described Emma's routine in the in-between, how she walked the same paths every day, trying to reach destinations that kept shifting just out of reach. How she would sit in the empty shell of our childhood home, writing in a journal that never retained its words. How she sometimes stood at windows, pressing her hand against the glass as if she could feel our world on the other side. Then came the warning. The shadows are getting interested in her, Voidwalker messaged one night. They notice when someone starts to realize they don't belong here, and they don't like it when we try to leave. What shadows? I asked. The ones that keep us here. They're not like normal shadows. They move wrong, think wrong. They're hungry in ways you couldn't understand. How do I help her? How do I get her out? There was a long pause before the response. There are doorways, places where the membrane between worlds is thin, but finding them is dangerous. The shadows guard them. I don't care about dangerous. Tell me how. Voidwalker sent coordinates to an abandoned subway station on the outskirts of the city. Come at midnight. Bring something that belongs to her. And whatever you do, don't look directly at the shadows. They take that as an invitation. I should have been more skeptical, should have questioned why this random internet stranger knew so much. But grief does strange things to logic. When you've lost someone, even the most impossible hope feels better than no hope at all. The subway station was everything you'd expect from an abandoned underground structure. Graffiti-covered walls, broken tiles, air thick with decades of dust. My flashlight beam caught something moving in the corners, but when I turned to look directly, there was nothing there. I clutched Emma's diary to my chest, the one she'd kept hidden under her mattress since high school. Voidwalker had been specific about bringing something with strong emotional connections. Following their instructions, I made my way to the platform's end, where a maintenance door stood slightly ajar. Beyond it, a service tunnel stretched into darkness. My phone buzzed with a message from Voidwalker. The shadows are aware of you now. Don't stop moving. Don't look back. As I walked deeper into the tunnel, the air grew thicker, heavier. My flashlight beam seemed to stop a few feet in front of me, as if the darkness was too dense to penetrate. And there were sounds. Whispers that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, speaking words that almost made sense. Then I saw it. A door that shouldn't exist, set into the tunnel wall. It was made of what looked like black glass, its surface rippling like liquid despite being solid to the touch. Carved into its frame were symbols that hurt my eyes to look at directly. Another message. This is it. The door will only open if it senses both you and something connected to her. But be warned. Once you step through, the shadows will try to keep you too. They're always hungry for more wanderers. I reached for the handle, but before I could touch it, my phone screen flickered and displayed one final message. Behind you. I spun around. The tunnel behind me was filled with darkness that moved wrong, shapes that twisted and writhed in ways that defied physics. They were vaguely humanoid but wrong, like someone's attempt to draw people without ever having seen one. And they were coming toward me. I yanked the door open and threw myself through. The world on the other side was exactly as Voidwalker had described. The sky was a perpetual twilight, casting everything in muted shades of gray. Buildings stood like hollow versions of themselves, their windows dark and empty. The air felt thick, almost gelatinous, and complete silence pressed against my ears like a physical weight. And there, in the distance, was a figure in a burgundy sweater. "Emma!" I screamed, but the sound seemed to die inches from my lips. She turned, and for a moment, her face lit up with recognition. But then something shifted in her eyes, something vacant and wrong, and she started backing away. "Emma, please, it's me. We have to go." The shadows were seeping through the door behind me, reaching with limbs that weren't quite arms, moving with a purpose that felt ancient and hungry. I ran toward her, holding out her diary. "Remember this? Remember all the secrets you wrote about Jason Matthews in 9th grade? Remember how you let me read it when my first boyfriend broke up with me, just to show me that heartbreak was survivable?" She stopped moving away, her head tilting slightly. "Michael? Yes, it's me. We have to go now." The shadows were getting closer, their forms becoming more defined, more wrong. They moved like a time-lapse video of decay, all jerky movements and unnatural angles. Emma's eyes cleared for a moment, real recognition flooding back. "Oh God, Michael, how long have I been here?" "Too long, but I'm getting you out." I grabbed her hand. It felt cold, almost insubstantial, but I held on as tight as I could and pulled her toward the door. The shadows surged forward, their whispers becoming screams that sounded like radio static played backwards. One of them reached for Emma with what might have been a hand, its touch leaving frost-like patterns on her skin. She screamed, the sound piercing through the heavy air, and the diary in my hand suddenly felt white-hot. I threw it at the nearest shadow. The book passed right through it, but the thing recoiled as if burned. "The memories!" Emma shouted. "They hate memories!" I started reciting every memory I could think of as we ran. "Remember when you taught me to ride a bike and I crashed into Mrs. Peterson's rose bushes? Remember when we spent all summer building that treehouse that Dad said would never stand but it's still there? Remember when you sang at my graduation and your voice cracked on the high note?" Each memory seemed to push the shadows back, creating a path to the door. We were almost there when the largest shadow moved to block our way. It was massive, its form constantly shifting between shapes that shouldn't exist. Emma squeezed my hand and started singing, the same song she'd sung at my graduation, voice crack and all. The shadow writhed as if in pain, its form destabilizing. We threw ourselves through the door and slammed it shut behind us. The sound of it closing echoed through the tunnel like a gunshot. Emma collapsed against me, solid and real and alive. We sat there in the darkness, holding each other and crying until our phones lit up with missed call notifications and the first gray light of dawn started seeping through the tunnel entrance. That was 6 months ago. Emma's return was labeled a miracle by the press, though she couldn't, or wouldn't, explain where she'd been. The official report calls it a case of dissociative fugue, a psychological term for when people forget who they are and create new lives elsewhere. The police were just happy to close the case. But sometimes, late at night, I see her staring out windows with a distant look in her eyes. Sometimes, she wakes up screaming about shadows that move wrong. And sometimes, when I check Whisperweb, I see new messages from Voidwalker, warning others about doors that shouldn't exist, and shadows that hunger for the lost. I keep Emma's diary locked in a safe now. Sometimes the pages seem to move on their own, and late at night, I swear I can hear whispers coming from inside. But as long as it stays locked away, as long as Emma stays in the light, we're safe. At least, that's what I tell myself. But yesterday, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. My own shadow. It moved a fraction of a second after I did. And this morning, I found a message on my phone from an unknown number. Some doors once opened, never fully close. The shadows remember you, Michael, and they're still hungry. I haven't told Emma. How could I? She's finally starting to smile again, to live again. But I know the truth now. The in-between isn't just a place. It's alive. It's patient. And once it knows you exist, it never really lets you go. So if you're reading this, consider it a warning. If you find a forum that promises to help you find someone you've lost, think carefully before you create an account. Because sometimes, when you go looking for the missing, you discover why they went missing in the first place. And sometimes, the door you open to save someone else becomes the door that something else uses to find you. The shadows are getting longer now, night is falling, and I swear I can hear whispers coming from my computer, calling me back to Whisperweb, back to the in-between. I should delete my account, I should run, but I can't help wondering, how many others are trapped there? How many more could I save? The cursor blinks on my screen, waiting for me to make a choice. And somewhere in the darkness, the shadows are waiting too.